Hi, I'm Venna. My family watched me work 2 jobs, skipping meals, nearly passing out from hunger, while they pocketed every dollar Grandma sent to help me. They told me, "You're just not trying hard enough," as I rationed crackers alone in the dark. Then, at Grandma's birthday dinner, in front of everyone, she asked, "Sweetheart, isn't the $900 I send you every month enough for you to eat?" And in that moment, as every head turned and my parents went pale, I saw the truth. How long does it take to forgive a family that let you starve while lying to your face? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop your story below. We'd love to hear it. I opened my eyes to the dark, my phone buzzing softly on the floor next to the mattress. It was 4:30 a.m., the cold air seeping through the cracks in the window, reminding me winter was creeping in. I pulled on a hoodie that smelled like coffee and stale detergent, layered another sweatshirt on top, then slipped my feet into shoes with soles so thin I could feel the floor. I grabbed the jar of coins from my dresser, tipping it, counting quarters with the soft click of each metal edge. Not enough for the bus. Again. I tied the laces tighter and decided to walk. The streetlights were still on as I moved past empty yards and cars glazed with frost, my breath puffing like small ghosts in the dark. I checked my phone while crossing the street. The screen cracked in a spiderweb that made it hard to read. A text from Grandma blinked at me. "Proud of you." It was only 3 words, but I tucked them inside like a tiny flame, something warm to hold. When I got to the bakery, the manager was already there, a cigarette dangling from her lips as she unlocked the front door. She didn't say good morning. She never did. I tied on an apron, my hair tucked back, hands moving from the register to the trays of bagels, steam rolling up when we opened the oven. The smell of bread was the only comfort, but even that felt like a tease when your stomach was empty. I cleaned the counters, stocked the shelves, wiped down tables while the early customers came in with their pressed coats and expensive coffee orders. I wondered if they saw me or if I was just another part of the background, the girl who said, "Have a nice day," while they scrolled on their phones. The shift ended, and I walked to the diner for the second job, the sky now a pale blue that made the cracked sidewalks look even rougher. My feet ached, a dull throb that started in my arches and climbed up my legs. I kept thinking about the online quiz I needed to take for my nursing class, wondering if I'd have enough energy to read the chapter before the quiz closed at midnight. At the diner, I tied on another apron, this one faded red, and tried to keep my smile steady for the customers who didn't look at my face when they ordered. I refilled coffee, cleared plates, washed dishes in water so hot it scalded my hands. My coworker handed me a sandwich at the end of the shift, wrapped in wax paper. It was a leftover, and she pressed it into my hands with a small nod, saying nothing. I ate it behind the building, leaning against the cold brick, chewing so fast I barely tasted it, shame burning in my chest, hotter than the coffee I'd poured all day. I didn't want to need it, but I did. My phone buzzed again, Grandma's name lighting up before the screen went black. Dead battery. I whispered a thank you to the dark, clutching my cracked phone in one hand while I pulled my backpack onto my shoulders. It was heavier than it should have been, filled with secondhand textbooks and loose papers covered in my messy notes. I walked to the bus stop, but the sign taped to the pole said, "Route suspended for maintenance." I stood there for a moment, letting that reality settle like cold rain inside me, then turned to start the walk home. The cold bit through every layer, each step a reminder that I was tired in a way that went deeper than bones, tired in a way that lived in the soft parts of me that I tried to protect. Cars passed by, headlights brushing over me like brief cold spotlights before fading again. I could see the faint glow of my apartment complex blocks away, a dull yellow square against the dark. I pulled out my phone again out of habit, knowing it was dead, thumb swiping over the screen, pretending I could send Grandma a message to say goodnight. I wanted to tell her I was okay, even if it wasn't true, even if the only reason I was still standing was because I had no choice. I gripped my bag tighter, shifting it on my shoulder as the cold wind stung my face. In that moment, it wasn't the hunger that hurt the most. It was the silence of knowing that if I fell, if I collapsed right there on the sidewalk, the world would keep moving, and I would simply be another crack in the pavement for people to step over. I stopped under the streetlight outside my building, looking up at the pale moon that had the nerve to shine so brightly while I was trying to hold everything together. "I'm so tired of being the one who has to hold it all together," I whispered to the night, my breath catching in the cold air. I dug in my pocket and pulled out the crumpled reminder card about Grandma's birthday dinner, the one I'd nearly forgotten between shifts and homework and counting coins for bus fare. I stared at the date, circled in pink ink, a small heart Grandma had drawn beside it. Grandma's birthday invitation felt like a cruel joke I couldn't afford to laugh at, but it sat there on my dresser anyway, pink lettering and a small hand-drawn heart taunting me every time I walked past. That morning, I held it in my hand while I pulled on my jeans, the frayed hems brushing against my ankles. The apartment was quiet, my roommate gone for the week, leaving me alone with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the ceiling fan that never stopped turning. I stuffed the invitation into my pocket before heading out, not because I planned on RSVPing today, but because I couldn't stand looking at it anymore. The walk to work felt longer than usual, my mind chewing over every reason I had to skip the dinner. No money for a gift, no decent clothes that still fit right, and the last thing I needed was to sit across from Warren while he bragged about his latest promotion or vacation. But Grandma's voice echoed in my mind, the way she always said, "You're my strong girl," and it made me swallow hard against the knot in my throat. By the time I clocked out of the diner that evening, my legs were trembling, the weight of the double shifts pressing down on me like a wet blanket. I checked my phone, its cracked screen lighting up with a single notification, a missed call from Grandma. My heart twisted, guilt prickling under my skin. I sat down on the curb outside the diner, the chill from the concrete seeping through my jeans as I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm like a blanket on a cold day. "Venna, sweetheart, I was just thinking about you. I can't wait to see you at dinner." I closed my eyes, listening to her breathe, imagining her sitting in that tiny kitchen of hers, the one that smelled like cinnamon and old wood. "I'll try to make it, Grandma," I whispered, my voice catching. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said softly, and those words were a balm, even as they stung because I didn't feel like someone worth being proud of. After we hung up, I sat there, the streetlights buzzing overhead, remembering the year Warren turned 18. He got a Disneyland trip, complete with a new suitcase and a wad of spending money tucked into his pocket by Dad. I got a store-bought cake and a rush dinner at the cheap Mexican place down the street. No one remembered to take a picture, and the candles on the cake were leftovers from the year before. It wasn't even about Disneyland. It was about the way they looked at him, pride in every word they said, while I sat there trying to be small, trying not to want anything, because wanting meant disappointment. I shook off the memory as I stood, pulling my jacket tighter around me. I made a plan right then, standing under the yellow glow of the streetlight. I would skip lunch this week, walk instead of taking the bus, and take every extra shift I could find. Maybe I could scrape together enough for a small gift, something that wouldn't embarrass me when I handed it to Grandma. At home that night, I searched online for something I could afford. Everything felt too expensive, too flashy, too wrong. Then I found an old photo of me and Grandma from high school, her arm around my shoulder, both of us laughing at something I can't remember now. My hair was longer then, hers was darker, but the way she looked at me in that photo made my chest ache. I decided to print it and find a cheap frame, something simple but meaningful. As I lay in bed that night, the blankets pulled up to my chin, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of a car passing outside. Resentment bubbled up, ugly and hot in my chest. Why did Warren get everything without asking while I had to starve just to give back a little? Why did it always feel like I was second place in a race I never signed up for? I pressed my palms to my eyes, willing the tears away. I didn't want to cry about it anymore, but I also didn't want to disappoint Grandma. She deserved to see me, even if I wasn't put together like Warren, even if my jeans were worn thin and my shoes were scuffed. I whispered into the dark, "You're going, Venna. She deserves to see you." On Saturday morning, I wrapped the photo in tissue paper, sliding it into my bag with careful hands. My stomach was empty, a hollow reminder of the skipped meals that made this gift possible, but it didn't matter. I stood at the bus stop, the cold breeze cutting across my face as I clutched my bag, waiting. When the bus pulled up, I climbed aboard, the warmth of the heater hitting me like a wave. I found a seat by the window, pressing my forehead to the glass as the bus started to move. Sacramento rolling by in a blur of cracked sidewalks and leafless trees. The closer I got to Grandma's house, the heavier my chest felt with every stop the bus made. The bus slowed to a gentle stop in front of Grandma's street, and I stood, bracing myself as the doors creaked open. The cold air bit at my cheeks while I stepped down, clutching the cheap gift bag close to my chest. Each step toward Grandma's walkway felt like dragging a heavy anchor, the sound of laughter spilling from her living room windows, reminding me just how small I felt. The porch light flickered, warm and inviting, and I forced a smile as I knocked once before pushing the door open. The smell of roast chicken and buttery rolls wrapped around me like a memory I had missed for too long. Grandma turned, her face lighting up with that soft glow only she could give. "There's my girl," she said, holding her arms open, and I sank into them, breathing in the faint scent of her lavender lotion. For a moment, the ache of all those skipped meals and lonely bus rides faded. But over her shoulder, I caught the way Mom and Dad looked at each other, a brief, tight exchange that soured the warmth in my chest. Warren was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding behind some excuse about studying, as if missing Grandma's birthday was just another thing he could get away with. "Come in, honey," Grandma urged, pulling me further inside. The table was crowded with plates piled high, dishes I hadn't tasted in months. My stomach tightened, not from hunger alone, but from the shame of wanting to dive in while everyone else laughed and took it for granted. "Venna, you've gotten so thin," Aunt Marla exclaimed as I set down my gift on a side table. "Is that one of those fasting trends you're on?" I forced a laugh, picking at the edge of my sweater. "Something like that," I managed while Mom gave a weak chuckle, sipping her wine like it was the only thing keeping her hands busy. Dinner started, and I tried to focus on Grandma's smile, her eyes crinkling with each story she shared about her younger days. She passed me a basket of rolls, patting my hand. I tore off a small piece, pretending to be full, but the warmth of the bread nearly made me cry. It was when the plates were nearly cleared, the room buzzing with soft conversations, that Grandma looked right at me, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Sweetheart, you've gotten so thin. Isn't the $1,900 I send you every month enough for you to eat well?" The clatter of my fork hitting the plate was the only sound I could hear. My pulse roared in my ears as every face turned toward me, mouths parting, eyes darting between me and my parents. "What?" My voice was barely a whisper, the word tasting like ashes in my mouth. Mom's face lost all its color, her wine glass trembling in her hand. Dad's jaw tightened, his knuckles pale where he gripped the edge of the table. Grandma, calm as ever, reached beside her chair and pulled out a small stack of papers. "If you're not getting the money, Venna," she said softly, "then where is it going?" She slid the papers across the table, and I stared at them, the printed bank statements with my name on them blurring as tears filled my eyes. My hands shook as I picked up the top page, scanning the deposits that were supposed to be mine, deposits I had never seen, never spent, while I counted coins for bus fare and skipped meals to afford textbooks. I looked up at my mother, her lips trembling, words failing her as the truth sat there, heavy and undeniable. Dad cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, eyes wide with the kind of curiosity you can't hide when you're witnessing a family fracture. All those nights I starved. The words slipped out before I could stop them, my voice low but steady. "While you were lying to me." The room felt smaller, tighter, like the air was being sucked out with every breath I tried to take. My eyes locked on my mother's, The memory of her telling me Grandma was having money problems, slicing through me like a cold blade. "You told me Grandma was struggling, that she couldn't afford to help anymore." She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek, but no words came, no explanation, no apology, nothing that could make sense of the betrayal burning in my chest. The silence was thick, everyone frozen in place, the only sound the soft ticking of Grandma's kitchen clock in the background. Then, slowly, Grandma pushed back from the table, standing with a quiet strength that made everyone straighten in their seats. "Elizabeth. Robert. My office. Now." Mom and Dad looked like children caught sneaking out past curfew, their shoulders slumping as they stood, following Grandma down the hall without a word. The hallway light flickered as they disappeared, leaving me sitting there alone, the weight of every stolen dollar pressing down on my shoulders, the taste of betrayal sharp and bitter on my tongue. I stayed frozen in my chair long after Grandma led my parents away, the hush of the house only broken by the clink of someone setting a plate in the kitchen. Around me, relatives tried to pretend nothing had happened, making small talk that sounded tinny and hollow. My cousin Marcy asked about the weather as if she hadn't just watched my world collapse. I pushed my food around my plate, unable to take a bite, the smell of warm rolls making my empty stomach ache while shame burned hotter. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than the whispered conversations around me, every second reminding me of the nights I spent working until midnight, of the mornings I'd wake up so hungry my hands shook, of the cheap coffee that did nothing to fill the hollow in my belly. All while Mom told me Grandma couldn't help anymore, that I should be grateful for what little I had. I glanced around the room, trying to remember when it all started. When had the lies begun? When did the shame of asking for help replace the truth I deserved? I could hear my mother's voice in my head, telling me to stop complaining, telling me Warren needed more help, that I was ungrateful for even asking. And I had believed her. I believed her every single time. I stood, pushing my chair back so hard it nearly tipped. No one tried to stop me as I slipped out of the dining room, my feet moving down the hallway on their own, past family photos lining the walls, pictures of Warren with his wide, easy smile, pictures of him at his high school graduation, with his arm around Grandma, pictures that once made me proud of him, now twisting in my stomach like a knife. I stopped outside Grandma's office door, pressing my ear against the wood, the muffled voices inside sharp enough to cut through the wood. "You let your daughter starve," Grandma's voice came, low and firm. "I didn't. We were trying to help Warren. He needed it," Mom's voice cracking, excuses tumbling from her lips like old habits. "Years of lying, Elizabeth. Years. While she worked herself sick," Grandma said, each word a stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. Dad's voice, rough and quiet. "We thought we could pay it back, Mom. We thought it was temporary." "Temporary?" Grandma's voice rose. "She's your daughter." I pulled away, pressing my back against the wall as tears slipped down my cheeks. My breath came in sharp, short bursts, the hallway suddenly too narrow, the air too heavy. I slid down until I was sitting on the carpet, hugging my knees to my chest. All those nights I thought I wasn't working hard enough. All those times I blamed myself for not being like Warren. The moments I sat on the bus, head pounding from hunger, thinking I just had to try harder, work harder. But it wasn't me. They let me suffer. They let me starve to protect him. I heard a door click open, footsteps moving toward me. I wiped at my face, pulling myself up just as Grandma stepped out, her eyes softening when she saw me. "Venna, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. But I saw the storm still brewing in her eyes. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew. I needed to hear it. I needed someone to finally say it. She sighed, her shoulders heavy. "It was Warren," she said softly. "The money I sent was used to pay off his gambling debts. He wasn't at college, Venna. He never was. They kept up the lie because they didn't want anyone to know. They thought they were protecting him." I felt the floor tilt beneath me, my hand reaching for the wall to steady myself. My voice came out small, but it didn't shake. So I nearly starved. I worked 2 jobs, failed tests because I couldn't focus from hunger. And it was all for him? Grandma stepped closer, her hand resting on my shoulder, her thumb rubbing soft circles I didn't feel. You deserved better. I am so sorry, honey. I should have checked. I should have made sure. I swallowed, my throat tight, the betrayal wrapping around my chest like a vice. I thought of every moment I missed out on, every birthday I spent working, every time I told myself I just needed to push through. It was all for nothing. Worse, it was for him. The brother who never had to work for anything, who got everything handed to him while I scraped by with nothing. Grandma squeezed my shoulder. You're staying here with me this weekend. This ends now, Venna. You will never go hungry again. I wanted to argue, to tell her I needed to get back to work, to school, to everything I had been holding together by a thread. But I was so tired. So I nodded, letting her lead me back down the hallway, past the pictures, past the family I thought I knew. Later that night, I lay on Grandma's guest bed, the blankets tucked around me, the room smelling of clean laundry and faint lavender. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of the house, the tick of the clock in the hallway. They chose him, over me, every time. The words slipped from my lips, quiet enough that only I could hear them. But they were the truth, and I let them sit in the dark, a promise to myself that I would never let it happen again. The next morning, I woke to the soft clatter of cups and the gentle hiss of the coffee pot, the smell drifting under the door, warm and sharp, pulling me into the new day whether I was ready or not. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted overnight. It sat there, heavy, reminding me of every lie, every empty night I'd spent believing I just needed to work harder while they let me drown. I dressed slowly and found Grandma at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, her eyes meeting mine with a tired softness that told me she hadn't slept much either. The early light cut across the countertop, illuminating the creases in her hands as she patted the seat next to her. We didn't speak for a few minutes, just sat in the hush of the morning, the world outside still waking up while the world inside us felt like it was ending and beginning at the same time. She finally sighed, setting her mug down with a quiet clink. I should have paid more attention, Venna. I let them handle things because it was easier for me. I didn't want to learn how to send you money directly, so I just trusted them, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I stared into my coffee, watching the steam swirl and fade. I never questioned it, I said. I thought you couldn't help anymore, that you were struggling. I didn't want to be a burden. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. You were never a burden. I wanted to help. I just didn't realize they were taking advantage of that trust. I remembered the nights I spent in the dorm bathroom, crying quietly so my roommate wouldn't hear, rationing a pack of crackers because I couldn't afford another meal until payday. I remembered the phone calls when Mom told me Warren was too busy with his classes to come to dinner, too busy succeeding to call Grandma. All while I was scraping together change for bus fare. Grandma reached across the table, her hand covering mine. There's something else you need to know. She paused, taking a breath. I put aside $100,000 for your college fund, Venna. You got that partial scholarship, so your parents said you didn't need the full amount. I found out yesterday that they kept $60,000 for Warren. My breath caught, a sharp, painful sound in the quiet kitchen. I felt the world tilt, my hand tightening around my cup so hard I thought it might crack. So they took even what I didn't need, I whispered, and they gave it to him. The silence that followed was different from before, deeper, cutting into me as I realized every moment I thought I wasn't enough, every failure I blamed on myself, was tied to their betrayal. They let me think I was failing because I wasn't trying hard enough, I said, my voice rising. They let me think I wasn't enough while they were the reason I was drowning. Grandma squeezed my hand. That ends now, Venna. From this month on, I will send you $2,000 a month directly to you. No one else will touch it. I opened my mouth to argue, to say I didn't need it, that I would be fine, but the truth was I was tired of pretending I could do it all alone. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. but they felt different this time, like a layer of exhaustion washing off me. Later that day, I packed my bag and returned to the tiny apartment I shared, the bus ride back feeling longer than it was, my thoughts tangled with every memory of hunger, every moment I pushed through exhaustion, every moment I thought I was just weak. When I stepped through the door, the smell of cheap candles and stale takeout hit me, the clutter of bills on the counter reminding me of how hard I had fought just to stay afloat. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting the silence settle, and I made a choice. I called the content writing agency where I picked up gigs after my diner shifts, and I quit. My hands shook as I pressed end call, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was choosing myself. With the weekend shifts at the diner and Grandma's help, I could finally breathe. I walked to the small grocery store down the street, filling a basket with real food. Eggs, fresh fruit, a loaf of bread that wasn't the cheapest on the shelf. On impulse, I grabbed a pint of ice cream, holding it in my hands like it was something precious. When I got back, I found my roommate, Raina, in the kitchen, her hair tied back, her eyes tired but kind. I handed her the envelope of cash I had saved, her eyes widening. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," I said, "but I want to. You helped me when you didn't have to." She hugged me, and for a moment, the tightness in my chest loosened. That night, for the first time in years, I made a real meal. I scrambled eggs, sliced up an apple, and sat down at the small table, letting myself eat until I was full, not just enough to get by. As I cleaned up, I thought about the future, about school, about what it would feel like to finish my degree without collapsing from hunger or falling asleep on my textbooks because I was working too many hours. I allowed myself to dream again, to see a future where I wasn't just surviving, but living. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message that made my stomach drop. "Your parents are here. They want to talk." I stared at the message, the air in the room shifting, the quiet of the evening thickening around me. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the knob, taking a deep breath as I prepared to face them, unsure if I was ready, but knowing I couldn't hide anymore. I turned the knob, pulling the door open just enough to see them standing there in the hallway, looking smaller than I remembered. My mother's arms were wrapped around a grocery bag like it was a lifeline, and Dad's eyes were darting between the peeling paint on the door frame and the floor, never meeting mine. Neither of them spoke first. I stepped back, letting them in, watching them shuffle inside like strangers visiting a place they weren't sure they were welcome in. They sat down stiffly on the edge of Raina's bed, clutching the grocery bag like it might protect them from what was about to happen. I stayed standing, folding my arms across my chest, waiting. They tried to start with small talk, Dad mentioning how chilly it was outside, Mom commenting on how I looked thin but healthy. I didn't respond, just watched them, letting the silence stretch until it was too heavy for them to pretend anymore. Mom cleared her throat, setting the grocery bag down at her feet. "Venna, we need to talk to you about Grandma." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. She glanced at Dad, who shifted uncomfortably. "We think it would be good if you talked to her about the will," she said, her voice faltering at the end. I felt my stomach tighten, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You came here to ask me to lie to her for you?" My voice was calm, but I could hear the steel in it. Dad rubbed his hand over his face. "Venna, it's not like that," he started, but Mom cut him off. "She doesn't understand how complicated things are," she said, her words tumbling out faster now. "Your brother needed help, and we did what we had to do. We're family, and family sticks together." "Family sticks together," I repeated, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "Is that what you told yourselves when you took my college fund to cover Warren's gambling debts? When you let me think I was failing because I wasn't working hard enough while you were sending him to rehab with my money?" Mom's eyes welled with tears, her lips trembling. "We had no choice," she whispered. "You don't understand how hard it was for us. Warren needed help, and you were getting by." "Getting by?" I cut in, my voice rising. You call working double shifts and skipping meals getting by? You call crying myself to sleep in a dorm I could barely afford while you were covering his debts getting by?" Her tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands. "You're so cold, Venna. So ungrateful." I felt that old guilt clawing at me, the instinct to comfort her, to take back my words and tell her it was okay. But then my eyes fell on my phone sitting on the counter, the screen cracked from the time I dropped it running to catch the bus after a double shift, unable to afford a new one. And I remembered every night I went to bed hungry, every morning I woke up exhausted, all while they were protecting Warren, shielding him from consequences with the life I was fighting to build for myself. I took a breath, steadying myself. "No," I said quietly, "you made your choices. You chose to let me suffer so he wouldn't have to face his mistakes. You chose him over me every single time." Dad opened his mouth like he was going to argue, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm not helping you. I'm not going to lie to Grandma for you, and I'm not cleaning up your messes anymore." Mom started to sob, loud and shaking, like a child who'd been denied candy. Dad looked anywhere but at me, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say a word. I walked over to the door, pulling it open, letting the cold air rush in. "You need to leave." They didn't move at first, Mom's sobs echoing in the small room. Finally, Dad stood, pulling her up with him, guiding her toward the door. She was still crying, calling me cold, calling me ungrateful, telling me I didn't understand what it meant to be a family. I didn't respond. I watched them walk out, closing the door softly behind them, the latch clicking into place with a finality that echoed in the silence that followed. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my back against the door, shaking, tears finally spilling over as I pressed my palms to my face. "They're never going to change," I whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like ashes on my tongue. The apartment felt too quiet once their voices were gone, the weight of everything pressing down on me as I struggled to breathe. I pulled myself up after a while, moving to my bed and sitting down heavily, staring at the wall, letting the tears dry on my cheeks. Outside, the city kept moving, cars passing by, neighbors laughing as they came home, the world continuing on as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Everything inside me was shifting, breaking apart and coming together again, stronger this time, harder. I lay down, pulling the blanket over me, closing my eyes against the dim light filtering through the curtains, and let myself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in a long time. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, I had chosen myself, and that had to be enough. The next morning, Grandma called, her voice calm, but I could hear the storm in her silence. Grandma's voice on the other end of the line was soft, but it carried the weight of decisions made long before the call was placed. She asked if I could meet her for coffee at the small cafe by the river, the one we used to stop at on our way to the farmer's market when I was a kid. I agreed, slipping into my shoes and grabbing my jacket, the morning light filtering through the blinds as I locked the door behind me. The walk to the cafe was quiet, the early traffic humming as I passed by neighbors pulling weeds and the distant scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery mixing with the crisp air. Each step felt like I was moving towards something I'd spent my whole life avoiding, and for once I didn't want to turn back. Grandma was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her eyes following the gentle current of the river outside the window. When she saw me, she smiled. And it wasn't the fragile kind of smile that tries to hide worry. It was steady, grounding, and I let myself believe that maybe things would be different now. I sat down across from her, and we didn't speak for a moment, just letting the warmth of the coffee cups and the clatter of dishes from the counter fill the silence. She reached across the table, her hand brushing over mine, and I felt that familiar comfort I'd missed so badly. "I talked to them," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. "Your parents." I swallowed, my hands tightening around my cup. "And?" "They came to me after they left your apartment, begging me to talk sense into you, to convince you that families should forgive and forget." She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. "But I saw it, Venna. The desperation in their eyes, but not a shred of regret for what they did. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, the air in my lungs burning. "I can't pretend it didn't happen," I said, my voice low. She nodded. "And you shouldn't have to." She stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon clinking softly against the cup. "I spoke with the family, your aunts and uncles, even your cousins. I told them what your parents did, how they used your future to cover up Warren's mistakes. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. They know?" My voice cracked, the shame I'd carried for so long threatening to spill over. "They know," she said firmly. "And they're angry, Venna, angry for you. They told me they wished they'd known sooner, that they would have helped you if they'd realized what was happening." I pressed a hand to my mouth, closing my eyes as tears slipped free, not from sadness, but from the relief of not having to carry the secret anymore. "All this time," I whispered, "I thought staying quiet was the only way to keep the peace." "Sometimes silence only protects the wrong people," Grandma said, her voice steady. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table to me. "I've updated my will," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Your parents will not see another cent from me. I've made sure your future is secure." I stared at the paper, my reflection warped in the plastic of the table, and for the first time, I felt the weight of fear I'd carried for years begin to lift. "They're going to say you're cold," I said quietly. She let out a small, knowing laugh. "They already did, but sometimes cold is the only way to protect what matters." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just my grandmother but the woman who had fought through her own storms to stand her ground. In that moment, I understood what strength looked like, and it wasn't loud or cruel. It was clear, unwavering, and it demanded respect. We talked about the small things after that, my classes, the upcoming community fair, the new recipes she wanted to try. And as we finished our coffee, she stood and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of lavender and coffee grounds, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. As we stepped outside, the breeze was cool, rustling the leaves along the river, carrying away the last threads of guilt I had clung to out of habit. We walked slowly, matching each other's pace, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. It was enough to just be there, side by side, in the aftermath of truths spoken aloud. When we reached the corner where we would part ways, she squeezed my hand. "You're building your life, Venna, and you're doing it the right way." I swallowed past the lump in my throat, nodding. "I'm trying." "And that's enough," she said, pressing a kiss to my forehead before turning to head toward her car. I stood there for a moment, letting the warmth of her words settle into me before pulling out my phone to check the bus schedule. As I unlocked it, a message popped up on the screen, and my breath caught. It was from my mother. The words were short, sharp, and heavy. "You ruined us." I stared at the message, the weight of it pressing down on me for only a moment before I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs, and for the first time, I decided not to respond. After I decided not to answer her message, I put my phone down on the kitchen table, letting the silence of my small apartment swallow me whole. For a few moments, I just stood there, breathing, letting the truth settle deeper in my bones. They had sent those words, "You ruined us," like a final jab, hoping it would drag me back into the guilt that used to choke me. But it didn't. Not this time. I spent that morning cleaning, wiping down the counter, folding laundry, scrubbing the bathroom tiles. It was the kind of quiet work that let my mind clear, let me feel the ground under my feet. Each swipe of the rag felt like I was peeling off layers of shame that had stuck to me for too long. Around noon, Grandma called. Her voice was calm, but there was something heavy underneath, a deliberate weight in the way she paused before speaking. "Venna, we need to have a family meeting. It's time we settle this, all of it." I didn't ask for details. I just said, "Okay, Grandma," and promised I'd be there. The bus ride to her house felt different this time. I wasn't clutching a plastic bag of leftovers or fighting off dizziness from working double shifts. I wasn't scared of seeing them. My reflection in the bus window looked back at me, tired but steady, older than I felt, but stronger than I had ever known. When I arrived, the living room was already full. Aunt Lila and Uncle Ben were sitting on the couch, their eyes darting toward the kitchen where Grandma was making coffee. Cousins were scattered around, whispering in low voices, their faces shifting between pity and discomfort when they looked at me. Warren was there too, sitting by the window, his hands twisting in his lap, avoiding my gaze. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, hair unkempt. My parents were on the love seat, Corinne with her lips pressed into a tight line, Robert staring at the carpet like it held all the answers he couldn't find. I didn't sit. I stood near the doorway, arms folded, the air in the room thick enough to chew. Grandma entered with a tray of coffee cups, her steps deliberate, her eyes sharp. She placed the tray on the table and stood beside me, her presence a quiet wall of support. My mother was the first to break the silence. "Venna, we need to talk about what you've done." I raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. "You've made things difficult," she continued, her voice cracking just enough to seem fragile. "The family is looking at us differently now. You've embarrassed us." So Grandma's eyes flashed. "Corinne, enough!" But my mother pushed on, her voice rising. "We were trying to protect the family. Warren needed help, and we did what we had to do." I let out a slow breath, letting the words settle before I answered. "You didn't protect the family. You protected yourselves, your comfort at my expense." Warren shifted, looking up at me with eyes that were red, tired, and hollow. "Venna, I'm sorry," he mumbled. I held up a hand, stopping him. "This isn't about your addiction anymore, Warren. This is about the choices we all made." Grandma stepped forward, placing a folder on the coffee table. The sound it made against the wood was soft, but in that moment, it was louder than any shouting could have been. "These are the records," she said. "The bank transfers, the scholarship documents, everything. Everyone here deserves to know the truth." My father's face drained of color. "This isn't necessary," he muttered. "It is," Grandma countered, her voice steady. "We're done with secrets." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I saw the calculation in them, the way she glanced at the faces around the room, gauging their reactions. "You're tearing this family apart," she whispered, wiping her eyes. I took a deep breath, stepping forward. "No, you did that the moment you chose him over me. Every single time you lied, every time you let me starve so you could protect him, you were the ones who tore this family apart." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy, final. There was no going back, and I didn't want to. Aunt Lila cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "We support Grandma's decision," she said quietly, looking around the room. Uncle Ben nodded in agreement, and one by one the others followed, a quiet wave of support settling over the room. My mother looked at me, her face a mix of rage and desperation. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" I shook my head, a sad smile pulling at my lips. "No, I just know I deserve better." There was nothing left to say. Grandma placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, guiding me toward the door. As we stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face, the breeze carrying away the heaviness that had clung to me for so long. We stood on the porch for a moment, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped lower. I closed my eyes, letting the wind brush against my skin, feeling lighter than I had in years. "This is what freedom feels like," I whispered to myself, the words tasting like hope. Grandma squeezed my hand, and for once, I didn't feel like I was alone in carrying the weight of my life. Back at my apartment, I dropped my bag by the door and stood for a moment, taking in the quiet. It was different now, the silence. It no longer pressed on my chest like it used to, making me feel small, unseen. Now it felt like a clean slate, a soft space where I could breathe and think, where I didn't need to be afraid of what message would pop up next or who I would disappoint just by existing. I set my keys on the counter, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window, watching the drizzle slip down the glass. The soft patter against the pane was comforting, a gentle reminder that the world kept moving, even when it felt like mine had stopped. Classes started back up the following week, and for the first time, I was fully present. No more showing up to lectures with a stomach twisted in hunger, fighting to stay awake after overnight shifts, pretending I understood the material while my mind screamed with exhaustion. I could sit in class, take notes, and even raise my hand to answer a question without the fear of being wrong pressing down on me. One morning, as I was making my bed, I noticed Grandma's silver necklace on the bedside table. I picked it up, the small pendant cool in my palm, the chain light as it slipped between my fingers. I remembered the way she had clasped it around my neck before I left her house, her voice steady as she said, "Sweetheart, you deserve better." I smiled, a quiet warmth spreading through me. It wasn't just a reminder of survival anymore. It was a promise I had made to myself, to live in a way that honored the strength it took to stand up, to walk away, and to rebuild. I started doing small things I used to fear, grocery shopping without checking my bank account every 5 minutes, paying bills on time without the fear of overdrafting, allowing myself a small treat like a coffee before class without guilt gnawing at me. Each action felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a new life. Grandma and I met at our favorite cafe one rainy afternoon. She was already seated near the window when I arrived, the steam from her tea rising softly as she smiled at me. "You've come so far, Venna," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm proud of you." I looked at her, feeling the truth of it sink in. "I'm proud of me too," I whispered, the words tasting new but right. We talked about simple things, the new coffee place that opened on the corner, the neighbors who adopted a dog, the flowers blooming in her garden. It felt good to have a conversation that wasn't heavy with secrets or guilt, to just be. When my mother sent another message later that evening, something about how I had destroyed the family, I read it once, set the phone down, and let it be. I didn't need to reply, didn't need to defend myself or fall into the trap of their guilt. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. At the diner, I noticed a new girl working the counter, her eyes tired in the way mine once were. She was young, probably trying to balance school and work, her hands shaking as she handed out orders. One afternoon, I bought her lunch, sliding it across the counter without making a scene. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and gratitude, and I just nodded, understanding. Graduation came quietly, with no drama, no chaos. I walked across the stage in my gown, the silver necklace glinting against the dark fabric. In the audience, Grandma was there, her eyes shining, her hands clapping the loudest. I found her after and we hugged tightly. No words needed. That evening, I returned home, set down my cap, and stood by the window as the rain tapped gently against the glass, the city lights reflecting in the puddles below. The necklace rested against my collarbone, a gentle weight, a reminder of how far I had come. "I once believed I was weak because I was quiet," I whispered to the rain. But it wasn't weakness. It was waiting for the right moment to rise. As I stood there, letting the sounds of the rain and the distant city blend together, I realized that the future was open, wide, and clear. I didn't know exactly what was next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was free, and I was ready.